Hello everybody, and welcome back to 4FS Gaming. And in today's video, we are going to be looking at the game that has been taking up all of my spare time, Monster Hunter Rise. The newest in the long-running line of Monster Hunter games, it is a Nintendo Switch exclusive for the time being, but will be coming out on PC within the next year or two. So I do apologize for the lower frame rates and the not ultra-wide resolutions. Fortunately, there's nothing I can do about that. But in this first video, I decided to take a look at one of the most versatile weapons in the game, the Sword and Shield, capable of blocking, countering, dodging, bashing, and slicing effectively in combat, while also having the unique trait of using items while your weapon is drawn, among other things. Now without further delay, let's get into its basics. Actually, before we do, let me just quickly explain how damage works in Monster Hunter. Very basically, there are two types of damage, slicing damage and blunt damage. Slicing damage is focused and far more common among the weapons, and has the added benefit of slicing off tails or other parts of monsters. Blunt damage is better at breaking other parts of monsters that, for example, have armor on them, and can drain stamina and cause stun. Very basically, like I said, those are the basics of the basics. But I don't want to stray too far from the main point of the video. I did, however, want to mention these damage types because the Sword and Shield can deliver consistent slicing and blunt damage in its combos, though you can specialize into the sword part of the Sword and Shield with something called a switch skill. But again, that is a little bit getting ahead of ourselves, so let's, again, start with the basics of the Sword and Shield. The Sword and Shield, which I will shorten to SNS for this video just to make it a bit easier, is one of the most versatile and dependable weapons in Monster Hunter Rise, and actually has been for many of the previous games in the Monster Hunter series. Its attacks are fast, low commitment, and a lot of them link into each other or can be finished early to reposition and end the combo. While its per hit damage is lower than most weapons in the game, your attack speed is amongst the highest, and it's also very consistent. But that doesn't mean you have no high damage options, as we'll discuss later. And because your attacks are so fast, elemental or status builds are top tier, since you will reliably build up that damage and status better than slower weapons. On top of your offensive options, you have a pretty good selection of defensive options. You're able to remain highly mobile with dodges, and you can also block in a pinch, but it is the worst block in the game, or at least one of the worst. But you also have a dedicated counter move to hit back really hard, which I'll explain later. These attributes all come together to make the Sword and Shield a very beginner-friendly weapon, while also being amazing for more experienced players. It has a really low skill floor and level of entry, but an equally high skill ceiling. So no matter what point you're at in your journey through the game, the Sword and Shield will never be a bad choice. Now, let's move along to the specific moves that the Sword and Shield has access to. Your two basic attack chains consist of 3 hits. X button inputs will result in a chop, a side slash, and ends with a 2-hit Sword and Shield combo. And it is kind of slow, so I wouldn't really recommend going through for the 3rd hit of the X button combo. A button inputs will start a lateral slash, then a return stroke, and ending with a spinning rising slash. If you hold a direction while hitting A, you'll do a 3-hit shield bash combo that does good blunt damage to monsters. The X button combo can lead into the A combo after any attack, which is recommended to avoid the last slow hit of the X button combo. However, the A button combo cannot chain into the X combo, so keep that in mind. If you push X and A at the same time, you'll perform an advancing slash. This launches you forward and is good at closing distance or repositioning. It also acts as your draw attack if you're moving forward and hit X while your weapon is sheathed. At any point in a combo, you can hit X plus A to do a round slash. This lets you turn around while continuing to attack the target. If you push X and A at the end of a combo, you'll get the Spinning Reaper instead. This does almost twice the damage of a round slash, but does not allow the combo to continue normally. However, you can follow up with a backstep, which then leads into a few options on its own. You can perform a backstep after any attack by hitting back plus A at the same time. Release the backstep immediately and you'll get a standard advancing slash, which then combos like normal. Charge it up all the way and you'll get a charged slash. Land this on a monster and you'll go into a scaling slash and jump into the air. Once there, you can hit X for a jumping slash, or A for a falling bash. Alternatively, once you backstep, you can hit X and A to go into a perfect rush. This is one of your main damage-dealing combos, and it is a string that mixes slashing and blunt attacks that deals more damage if you wait slightly in between each button input. You can finish it with either a spinning reaper, which then leads into another backstep, or you can do a scaling slash, which leads into either a jumping slash, a falling bash, or a new move that if you hit X and A, you will get the plunging thrust, which deals high amounts of focused damage. Also, during Perfect Rush, your moves will never bounce off of enemies. This is an effect in the game called Mind's Eye. There is also another way to get into Perfect Rush. While blocking, if you hit X, you'll go into just a standard combo. But if you hit A, you'll perform a guard slash. Your character will flash blue, and you will have what's called a guard point, and the move acts like a counter. Land it at the right time when you get hit by an attack or something that causes knockback, and you'll perform a shield bash and go straight into a perfect rush. And even if you don't time the counter correctly, there is still a chance that you will block the attack. However, it is not guaranteed and can leave you open to taking damage. A big advantage that the Sword and Shield has over other weapons is that all of these moves that I just mentioned are extremely low commitment, meaning that you can dodge or block out of them to skip recovery animations and stay aggressive, or reposition to get away from danger. Some of these moves also have invincibility frames, or iframes, meaning that you will not take any damage if you are quote-unquote hit during these frames of animation. The backstep counts as an evade, so it has iframes. So does the initial hit of a scaling slash. They also give you iframes. And the shield bashes have these things called guard points. These happen when during an attack, if your shield is in front of you, you can block attacks. Think of them as mini counterattacks that you have during combos. For the Sword and Shield, they can be a bit tricky to land, but are extremely satisfying when you pull them off. That covers the basic movesets for the Sword and Shield. So let's move on to the Silkbind moves. Let me explain what a Silkbind move is very quickly. At the bottom of the screen, you'll notice that you have two little icons. These are your wire bugs. Your Silkbind moves are special moves that each weapon gets in Rise, and each weapon has access to two of them. And the Sword and Shield gets two of my personal favorites to start off with. If you hold down ZL plus X, you'll perform what's called a Falling Shadow, a long-range forward vault that leads into several different options. If you don't hit the monster with the first hitbox, you can simply follow up with a plunging thrust or a jumping slash with your button inputs. If you do hit a monster, you'll automatically follow up with a scaling slash that leads into any of your aerial options. This move is extremely useful, considering that most weapons do not have access to such high degrees of mobility when their weapon is drawn. And the recovery on the wire bug itself after you use this move is very fast, so you should use it often to either reposition or continually attack the monster with mounting damage. The other Silkbind move is called the Windmill. If you press ZL plus A, the tip of your sword detaches and is spun around your head on a cable, dealing a high amount of overall damage. It also has a massive amount of invulnerability frames at the start of the attack, making it perfect for counterattacking monsters. Both of these Silkbind moves can be comboed into from most of your attacks, allowing you to reposition or counterattack during your attack chains, because, as I mentioned, a lot of the Sword and Shield's attacks are very low commitment and can be comboed into each other, so most of these moves can be used after or before pretty much any move. And now we move on to the switch skills. Switch skills in Monster Hunter Rise are skills that change how you can use a particular weapon on either a basic or a fundamental level. Each weapon has 3 to choose from, but let's start with the first slot for the Sword and Shield. This replaces your Shield Bash combo with the Drill Slash combo. Instead of hits 2 and 3 of the combo dealing blunt damage with your shield, you now stab into the monster and rip out the sword with force, dealing high amounts of focus damage that works well when dealing elemental or status damage. But, as a trade-off, you no longer have any sort of high stun damage, so it is a trade-off. But for elemental builds or status builds, it is a very worthwhile trade. In slot 2, you can change out your Advancing Slash, which is your X plus A move, into a Sliding Slash. With this move, you'll slide along the ground and attack. If you don't hit anything, you'll do a Rising Slash that combos into all your normal moves. If you hit A while you're sliding, you'll leap into the air and can perform a jumping Rising Slash into a normal Jumping Slash, which then combos like normal. If you hit a monster with the sliding attack itself, not only will you get a small amount of iframes, you'll also go into a Scaling Slash and can do a Slash or Bash out of it. You also have access to this move by backstepping and releasing the button immediately, which then leads into your other combos like normal. Out of the 3 switch skills the Sword and Shield has access to, this is the one I recommend taking the most, since it is the most useful for any situation you'll find yourself in. Mounting damage is important, and with this skill, you'll deal a lot more than the already high amounts the Sword and Shield can dish out. And finally, for the final switch skill, we have one of the most satisfying Silkbind moves in the game, called the Metsu Shoryugeki, or quite simply, it's just a Shoryuken. It is a counter move that replaces the windmill. The counter window is incredibly short compared to the windmill's iframes, so timing is required to get the most out of it. If you use the move on its own, without countering an enemy attack, it will deal a respectable amount of damage, send you pretty high into the air, and can be followed up with a falling bash. But if you manage to counter a move, you'll hit the monster more times, deal more damage, soar way higher into the air, and will deal more damage on the way back down. The only downside to this move is that, while its vertical range is incredible, it can't hit very far in front of you. And if you counter a move while the monster is moving, there is a good chance the move will whiff. And beyond the initial counter, this move, Shoryuken, does not have any iframes. So if the monster is in an attack chain, you'll get hit before doing the falling bash. But when you do land it, the damage you deal is unquestionably hefty, and I have broken many a monster part by doing this move, and it deals tons of stun damage as well. And really, there are very few things more satisfying than landing a Shoryuken in Monster Hunter. And don't worry, we are almost done, because that just about covers everything you need to know about the Sword and Shield's moves in Monster Hunter Rise. Very basically. I could go into more detail, but then this video would get a little bit too long. But before we go, allow me to give you some advice on what skills you should look at when using the Sword and Shield. Well, to be completely honest, outside of skills that are only useful for specific weapons like bowguns or charge blades, there aren't a lot of bad skills for the Sword and Shield. But to name a few, Critical Draw and Punishing Draw are next to useless, since your draw attacks aren't very strong. Quick Sheath is entirely skippable since the Sword and Shield has the fastest sheath speed in the game anyway, and Focus because that only affects your charged slash from the backstep, which is a move I hardly use, personally. That's just my personal take on it. My recommended skills would be things like Slugger and Stamina Thief for the extra stun and exhaust on monsters, but that's only if you're using the Shield Bash combo. If you're using the Drill Slash combo, use elemental or status boost skills to improve the element or status of your choice. And really, the skills that you pick are entirely up to the playstyle that you have with the weapon. And there are so many skills that going through all of them would extend this video far too much, far more than it already is. And we'll be explaining greater detail in a later video if you guys enjoy this one. And along that similar line of thought, explaining how to play the Sword and Shield would be me explaining all of the little things that you could do, but it really just boils down to Be sure to hit the monster with your weapon, use the right kind of attacks on the right parts on the monster, and try your best not to get hit. Aim for the head with your blunt attacks, aim for slicing off the tail with your slashing attacks, and just keep hitting the monster until the hunt is over. And really, that's about all I can say. And on that bombshell, that wraps it up for this tutorial on the moves and styles of the Sword and Shield in Monster Hunter Rise. Which I just now realized I've been calling the Sword and Shield instead of the SNS for this whole video, but, you know, who cares? It doesn't really matter. I've already recorded all this stuff, so, you know, whatever. This video was kind of weird to put together, and the video editing I'm sure will be quite different from what you're all used to, but I have in my mind right now as I'm recording this, before I do any video editing, that I wanted to try something fun and different this time around. So let me know what you all think in the comments. Do you want to see more Monster Hunter content? Would you prefer to just see just Battlefront content from me? Or should I do a mix of both, with some other games thrown in just for fun? I have some other games that I would love to cover. I'd like to know what you all think. But, until next time, I do sincerely hope that you all enjoyed the video, and be sure to stay safe out there, hunters.